want to introduce to you all. I'm sure many of you have already met him, but Greg Tuttle is here. He is the digital evangelist for the diocesan office, helping us get the good news out of what God is doing across the diocese. And he's also the assistant campus minister at Agape House, which is our campus ministry at San Diego State University. And he's going to be talking with us tonight about how to engage young adults in voter participation. So, Greg, thank you for being here, and I am going to turn it over to you, friend.
Thank you very much, Jason. Can we have you already begun the meeting in prayer?
Please start us in prayer.
Okay, I'm happy to. This is from the Book of Common Prayer, 1979, page 822, prayer 24, which is the prayer for elections. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, to whom we must account for all our power and privilege, guide the people of the United States and of this community in the election of officials and representatives, that by faithful administration and wise laws, the rights of all may be protected and our nation will be enabled to fulfill your purpose. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. I am thrilled to talk about voter engagement with young people, and I want to share my screen, and we'll just kind of go from there. I think I want to share my screen. Yes, I do want to share my screen. Excellent. Can you see something?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Does it say BCP 1979?
Absolutely.
Dude, we're off to the races. This is great. I've been tasked with talking about engaging voters who are young. We talk about the youth vote often, but that's just about as easy as encompassing the old vote. So I want to talk about the people first language of voters who are young, and to unpack that a little bit with a little bit of history, in that the first time that I was aware of voting, other than outside my family of origin, was on Sesame Street. Sesame Street had been running in its former self as Sam and Friends. Sesame Street ran voter engagement for young people as early as the 1960 election of between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, and that's what it looked like. And you can see this is Sam and Friends, which is Jim Henson's first project, and you can see Kermit the Frog right there. It has continued throughout time with, especially this was recently, because it is really, really important to engage young voters. And this means it. So what does engagement mean? And no kidding, this is going to be much more of a conversation maybe than whatever else we're doing. I've only watched the one with Douglas Worthington, who did a great job. And I want to talk a little bit about what your idea of engagement is, please. Julie's talking, yet cannot be heard.
Okay, there, is that better?
Beautiful.
I would say one component of engagement is education.
Nice.
To explain to people their right and privilege to vote, as well as to educate them on the issues of voting that we're voting on.
Thank you. Excellent. May you unmuted for a second?
The thing that hits me when you mention Sesame Street.
Oh.
It may not just be voters. I mean, it can be people much younger than voters.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really, oh gosh, I've seen projects 6th grade or maybe younger where the kids voted for the presidential candidates. And I think at that age, it starts people thinking about the opportunity they'll have to eventually vote. And the schools would tally the ballots and so on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. May you unmuted for a second?
As a poll worker, I always love to see when people bring their children in to vote to the voting places and you know, go to the booth with their children, because it's to me a wonderful memory I had of when I was growing up. In fact, in those days you had the levers, so I even got to push down some of the levers,
That's great.
which made voting a very special activity as well as a privilege.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I love that. So we've talked about engagement. Now I want to talk the target demographic that we're really describing are voters who are young. And I wonder what that means to you.
Younger than me.
There you go. Nicely done.
I was thinking it means, say, maybe up to 35.
Okay.
Which is older than Jason, but still.
Anybody else have an opinion on what that means other than demographically what other people tell us it means?
I think, I mean, at least in the life of the church, we tend to seem to talk about young adults. So someone that's of the age to vote, 18 or older, but we tend to talk about young adult as 35 being about the threshold, it seems like these days. Although it gets older and older, right?
For sure, within the church. Now, demographically, you hear 18 to 25 a lot as far as voting goes. And if you think about the knowledge and is different than the maturity level of that voter. And what I mean by maturity, I mean experience in the ballot, in the voting booth. Somebody who's 18 has the idealism and knowledge to have an incredible impact, but has no experience of it. Going to the booth is a daunting experience. If you've never been, May, like you talked about as a child, if you've never been, the act of going into this, they then close the thing behind you. Am I supposed to talk with anybody? Can I engage with anyone? These are all, this is a nerve-wracking experience. And now that we can vote by mail, it's much more accessible, much easier for students. And I'm going to use students a lot when I talk about 18 to 25-year-olds, because in my experience, we're talking about undergrad and graduate students. And there's a whole other realm of it that I have no experience with, because that is enlisted military persons. And that's a huge swath of our community that is really important to engage. And I know that there's a lot of work that's happening to that. And there's a lot of work that can and can't be done based on the role of the president, for example, as commander-in-chief. You can't have an opinion other than that. So what is it that you can continue to go? But let's get into that in just a second. The most important thing that I can do, and if you leave nothing else from this experience, is the role of active listening when you're engaging with somebody, because voter engagement is people engagement. And the best thing that we can do to actively engage is to actively listen with people. And as in conversations I know that Julie, you and I have had, as well, as far as active listening goes, is conversation killers are yes or no questions. So when it comes around to voting, are you going to vote? No. That was your moment right there, and it's gone. Who are you voting for? Answer. That's ridiculous. So what is it that you can do to keep that conversation going? What's a conversation starter? And open-ended questions are the best thing to do. And this is whether we're talking about voter engagement, we're talking about any sort of church evangelism, any invitation that we're doing. I want you to be part of this. So therefore, what am I going to do to engage you, to earn your trust, to do this? And this isn't electioneering. I don't want to talk about electioneering this whole time. We're not talking about campaigning. Who are you going to vote for? How are you going to vote for that? But the idea is, how do you do open-ended questions? And always in open-ended questions and conversational things, how do you feel about the election? Douglas Worthington in his piece talked about the difference between policy and politics. And policy is where the emotion lies. And politics is the expression of that. So what is it that we can do to engage in conversation through active listening? And by always, in any sort of active listening situation, to respond to that. What I heard you say, Lori, was that you like wearing white t-shirts. Is that right? Yeah, Lori says, I like wearing white t-shirts. You know, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that with me, because what you're doing is making a trusting bond. I haven't heard, Lori, that you like white t-shirts, but you're wearing one, so one can assume.
Good
But there's
assumption.
the other part that my dad always talked to me about assuming, right? Making an, yes, this is recorded for YouTube, so I'm not going to say that. But asking those open-ended questions on how do you feel about, when was the first time that you, asking those open-ended questions, or any other ones that you can think of when you're trying to engage someone in a conversation?
Well, a question that sometimes, or that has been shown to get voters to the polls, is a question that asks very specifically, you know, like, what is your plan to vote?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so
Great
they
one.
will have to say, well, I'm going to use the drop box near my house, or I'm going to pick up my mom and we're going to drive to the poll. Like, if you ask them what their plan is, even if they don't have a plan, the act of answering that question often reinforces voting for them, and they are more likely to actually vote.
And for a thermonuclear extrovert like me, and knowing the person who you're going to vote with, making it a social setting, how is it that you can encourage that? We talked about how voting can feel daunting. It's an unfamiliar process. And so if you can offer to go with them as a shepherd, that's fantastic. And poll workers are there as guides. May, can you please speak a little bit of that, your experience as what it is like to really encourage people to ask questions?
Well, I mean, I think I love the role of being greeter as a poll worker. So to try to welcome people in and ask them, you know, if they need anything or if they have everything they need. And then kind of guide them to where they need to go next, is kind of, I think that's kind of one of the things you definitely get trained about and is really kind of part of being a poll worker.
Nice. Thank you. And that training that goes along with that, because we want it to be a positive experience for people so that they can want to do it again. And that's exactly what we want. And if they have a positive experience the first time around, they're more likely to do it and go again. And that comes along to the old line that all politics is local. And by local, I mean, in this context, the conversation that you're having with the person that's right in front of you. And there are wonderful ways that we can do that and can engage those ways, and we'll talk about that at the end. Now we've talked about how engagement is all about developing relationships. Somebody who trusts you will trust a recommendation that you make. And that trust and that recommendation will go. Right now we're talking about voting. It could just as easily be for a restaurant. Hey, May, is there a great restaurant that you like in Linda Vista? Oh yeah, absolutely. I know that one right there. And we'll go to that because I trust May. And that's developing those relationships, which is so incredibly important, especially when it comes around to the right and responsibility of voting. Acknowledging, I think it's important to acknowledge the complexity of young adulthood. And I don't like that term very much, but I don't have an alternative, so we're just going to continue to use it. Young adulthood is a time when all of the experience and knowledge that has brought them up until this point in their life now thrusts them into a great and grand new experience. And thinking about university students, or well, whether it's military enlistment, this is everything that they have learned about themselves so far, thrusting against everything that they expect this next level to be. And there's a whole lot of complexity when it comes to that. And one of the things about tabling, which is the act of standing there and saying, hi, everybody, I'm from Agape San Diego, want to learn more about campus ministry? People make assumptions for us, about us, but also it's a really awkward time for students to go, I don't know what to do next, and I miss my friends. I need to make new ones. And one of the great things that I've come to learn is that with a level of listening and trust, you get people to say, like one of our students, Morgan, is happy to say, that we're the people, we Agape San Diego are the people that she longed to meet when she went to college. So to have that kind of openness of listening, to create an environment for listening, is really, really important. And there we go. Young adults are vulnerable to opinions, to ideas, to alcohol ads, to all the things. It's It's a wide, wide world. Credit card. I mean, there's a lot for students to think about. And now to get into a situation where they want to be engaged, as political scientists and political science students often do, it's important to pay attention and to listen. And that is the point where I'm going to invite Lucas. Can you hear Lucas?
Hello, hello.
Ta-da! Like magic. I'm gonna hop out of screen share so that we can see Lucas. A little bit of an introduction of who Lucas is. 2024 magna cum laude graduate of San Diego State University with a bachelor's degree in political science, a minor in international security and conflict resolution, earned a certificate in international relations for his time at Bahçeşehir University in Istanbul. And earlier this summer, he studied nuclear nonproliferation at Soka University of America, and then currently works with the San Diego Diplomacy Council. So
Awesome.
he not only is the most knowledgeable person that I know about this topic, but he is our target demographic. Welcome, target demographic.
Hello. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Hopping right into it, why do you vote?
Well, the surface level answer is because I want to change the future. I want to make sure that my values are represented in the laws and the people of this nation, the people holding elective office. And the deeper level is because if we as Americans don't vote, we will lose our right to vote. If we don't exercise that right, we will lose it. And there's a lot of history to back this up, and I would like to get into that, but I would say that I want to improve my community. I want to do what I feel is the right thing and put the people in power that I think deserve it, who can serve the community and serve the nation.
Right on. Well, it sounds like, so why is voting important to you? A little bit of that history maybe that you alluded to.
Right. Thank you. And if we don't exercise our right, we'll lose it. This is corroborated by history. I love history. And if you look at globally, in human history, democracy is very exceptional. The vast majority of our time as a species is not in democratic structures. Even Athenian democracy, which is generally assumed to be the starting point of our modern conception of democracy, with the exception of course, the writings of John Locke during the Age of Enlightenment. Only propertied men could vote in Athenian democracy. In American democracy, it was much the same at the start. Only white propertied men could vote. And that franchise has, of course, expanded, but only because we fought for it, because incredible people fought for the right to be expanded. And there are still both indirect and direct intentional voter suppression techniques. There are voter suppression tactics. The main issue is, in my opinion, the main issue is the indirect factors, though, which is largely apathy and hopelessness about clearly nothing we do matters, nothing we vote for matters. And that's not true, because on every level, from national to local, our vote affects major change, and it will affect you regardless of whether or not you vote, firstly. And secondly, if you look at other countries in the world today, if you look at how certain nations have developed and how democracy is, we've heard a lot of terms. It's called democratic backsliding is the term. And generally it's important to me because without it, we will have even less control over our lives. And we might as well have what we can.
Right on. Thank you. With your time internationally, can you talk a little bit about who you met in Turkey and their experience with diplomacy?
definitely. Thank you. I had the incredible opportunity to study under a really remarkable professor who their class was actually on the development of democracy, history, and both ancient history and modern history, and of course, democratic backsliding. Yeah, there are these really great non-governmental organizations. One of them is Freedom House. It's a DC-based org, and then there's also one called the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, which is based in Stockholm. And both of those institutions measure democracy and global democracy. And a lot of the people that I met in Istanbul, a lot of the students I met in Istanbul were from either Central Asian countries or from Southwest Asian countries. And a lot of these nations are not democratic or somewhat democratic. It's complicated. Democracy is not a binary. It's a spectrum. Things are more or less democratic. And a lot of the Central Asian countries in particular it was really important for me to talk with those people, to talk with who I now consider friends, about post-Soviet countries which did not have the luck of being in Europe, unlike the Baltics, which the Baltics are now very democratized. They're touted as having a very high democracy score based on these institutions, as I mentioned, the organizations. Have a very high democracy score for the Baltic countries, but Central Asia did not get the economic or geopolitical opportunities, so they're still very much authoritarian. And if you look at Turkey as a nation, is an example of democratic backsliding, of greater and greater freedoms being removed from the population. And it's really, if you look at Turkey as an example of what can happen when democracy fails, look at the Weimar Republic as examples of when democracy fails. It has failed, it is failing now, and it'd be great if we didn't have it fail here, because authoritarian countries are also more likely to engage in aggressive nationalism, more likely to start wars, and that is not good for the era in human history we are in and moving towards.
Excellent. Thank you for that. It's an incredible experience. One of the things that I'm most interested about is, and looking at our time, what is it that we can do to help engage, our population, especially this demographic of 18 to 25. You know a lot about the student body that you worked with, a lot of the idealism that comes up with that. So I'd like to continue with the slides and perk up any time that you see something that reflects with what you're thinking about. All right.
Okay.
Excellent. All right, back to this. So we talked about how voter engagement is people engagement, and especially thinking to say, oh, go out and talk with people. I'm considering the people that I talk with, and Lucas is high on that list. Lucas is certified, educated, knowledgeable, and idealistic. So what is it that I can do as somebody who doesn't have all that qualification, encourage somebody to vote? Because this is all about engagement. And how is it that you engage effectively? How it is that you can engage in a long-term way? And this has to do everything, invite somebody to church. This is the same idea. You're building trust with one person. And what is it that you can do with that one person in order to encourage them to vote? In starting somebody to vote if they have never voted before, and this is going back to the idea that taking a child to the voting booth, having them hold your hand, because they can't vote for themselves, they can't vote, but having them hold your hand to know what it's like to push the button on the screen, to pull the lever, as May talked about. Because if you don't have that experience yet, what is it that you can do next to help people identify the values that motivate them? And then to go through whatever propositions exist, what can you do to then encourage that level of personal connection and then move from motivation into action? And I think that's the call to action that we're really trying to think about today, to understand that those values are made up of moments and what exists in that moment so that you can shortlist what those values are in their life. Trying to talk about somebody in a context of, age, I'm not sure is very accurate. I know a lot of 12-year-olds. I was a chaplain last week at Camp Stevens, for example, and the life experience of one child was more than I have had in my entirety, and they were a quarter of my age. What is it? They understand their values so much more clearly than I do now. So what is it that we can do to have those shared experiences drive what it is that we can do together and to communally encourage people to vote? Because through community, we hear God's call in a different way than we might do as a hermit. There are wonderful, incredible ways that we can do and encourage people in community, not mass, not thinking about uniformity, but unity. What is it that we can do for that? This is a whole other 10 minutes that we're not going to get into right now. There you go. But the idea of engagement, what is it that you can do to engage with people? And now we get to the meat of it, how, where, and when. And this is a really, really great thing that I would love to get your perspective and have you think about. Where do you live and work and have your being? Is there a restaurant nearby that you can talk with the manager and say, every Tuesday night, we want to camp here for 2 hours, put a table tent up and say, we're here to listen about the election, not talk about the election. We're here to listen about the election. If there's a park nearby, to set up a table tent on the park, making sure that you're following all the rules that are needed to do for that presence, but to sit there and to be a listening ear. And somebody might come the very first time and stay for, let's say we're going to do it once a week for 4 weeks, but it's that every Tuesday at 4, you're going to be there. And so people know that you're going to be there and you can have a space and you can be the non-anxious presence in that space. And then of course, over and over and over and over again, because it might take, 3 weeks for somebody to see that you're okay and then come the 4th week. But it's to understand how you can create that space for presence and listening so that you can encourage them to then vote. Because friends, you get a free sticker out of it. And that's what the 8-year-old in my family loved. He was so excited. He was ready to go get a sticker. So some resources, as always. These are just how I Google search nowadays. Hashtag vote faithfully. And Rock the Vote is still a thing. They're fantastic. They started in the 90s. They're still going strong. And the Secretary of State has some really good options for what is it that you can do to engage high school students, because this goes back to the idea of, Jason and I, you were talking a little bit earlier about, people come to me after a career of youth ministry, can't come to me and say, hey, how can I start a high school youth group? You use the second graders that you have in your space. And then in a decade, you'll have the high school youth ministry. So Vote Faithfully goes to the Episcopal Church Office of Governmental Relations. Rock the Vote is Rock the Vote. They've just been doing it for a long time. And I think if there's nothing more, choose to listen. Thus endeth the reading, my friends. Thanks be to God.
Thanks,
Do you have any questions for Lucas, for me? Do you have any reflections on what we've spoken about?
I'm really grateful to Lucas. Thank you for bringing just all that background and your personal experience. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, I definitely want to thank actually both Greg and Lucas for that. And I think it's, for me, I like the point about really thinking about the issues, thinking about and having discussions about, rather than we're so focused on, personalities and personas with, you know, these elections these days. And so to really kind of focus on, you know, what's the world you want? What are some values? What are some, you know, policies or even laws that you want to see in, you know, to do, and, you know, including issues of, you know, abortion or immigration or even support for education. You know, I think that's something that, and to try to make sure that they understand the connection to an election with these kind of things that they care about. I think is kind of it's a challenge, but I think, you know, hopefully that could be more relevant.
Thank you for that.
And I thought also Lucas's talk was fascinating. I had a sense that, you know, if you don't vote, you lose the right to vote, but I'm happy, not happy to hear that it's backed up by, you know, actual studies. But the aha moment for me was, you know, when we think of young adults, we think of high school and college students, but you mentioned enlisted military, and Gary and I are go to Christ Church in Coronado, and military is huge here, and it's perhaps the untapped market, for lack of a better word, that we have in Coronado. It's certainly trickier because most of them, I suspect, having been a military junior growing up, are not their residency is not California. So if we were to do anything with them, we would have to help them figure out how do they get registered to vote in their home states. But it gives me something to think about. So thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments for Greg and Lucas?
My only thought was Lucas cannot be your typical voter. He was told
That's a
far,
good point.
he was,
His typical, I think you said he was 22. I
Yeah,
mean, he's not
he
a
was-
typical
he was far too well
21.
informed and articulate.
Yeah.
But thank you.
What are you saying about people in their 20s, Gary? Come on.
Yeah. We have children that went through their 20s, so we kind of have a little bias on that one.
20s, he knows much more than I do. So,
Well, and I mean, the body of Christ has many parts. And so one of the things that I'm really grateful for is the passion that Lucas and knowledge that Lucas's peers represent. You talk to any sustainability major and they will tell you exactly what, where, when. Business majors the same way. It's the level of education and passion that I think Lucas represents very well. Lucas is exceptional in many ways, and I'd be happy to say how exceptional he is for the next several hours. And objectively, it's pretty typical for college students in this era to have this level of knowledge, passion, and drive, because they recognize how much this is their world and how much they can change it.
And that is
Greg,
a very hopeful sign for the future.
yeah. Greg,
So my burning question to Lucas is, given what's happened the last couple days, or actually the last couple weeks, has there been a change in attitude in terms of, you know, kind of people in among your peers in terms of attitudes towards engaging in the upcoming election?
Absolutely. I know several of there's levels of close friends. I'm getting semantic. I have several friends who now are going to vote that weren't going to. Largely because, I also saw one friend of mine decided to actually register because of the attempted assassination on former President Trump. And there are major, in my experience, anecdotal though it may be, in my personal experience, I think that the energy and polarization and apathy are all massively massively exacerbated in my generation. There are people who do not care at all, and then a huge number of people who are very active in politics. I have not seen many people who are only somewhat political. If you have a little bit of interest, you are very political. If you, or you have zero interest, largely apathy. I've seen many of my peers simply, and unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with the climate crisis and how we've been told since we were born, largely in our elementary schools, in that environmentalism is a problem, this is an issue, and we've seen nothing happen. And that takes out, so to speak, a huge chunk of people because we simply are apathetic, because nothing will change no matter who we vote for. It also doesn't help that with social media, you have the rise of these echo chambers in which people won't really talk with each other. And that creates an attitude of, well, we could never actually reason with the other side. That's another unfortunate thing I've seen among my generation is there is less of a willingness to talk with people on either side because we will disagree on fundamental facts. We don't disagree on fundamental values. Funnily enough, all our values are pretty much the same. We want to be happy. We want to take care of our community. But there are basic principles, you could say, that we disagree on. And I'm very hopeful because I think that the members of my generation that are very enthusiastic about voting are going to do massive change. And simultaneously, I really hope that the political polarization, we can overcome that as a generation rather than continue to exacerbate it. Because ultimately, if we can't talk with each other, then the best we have is gridlock. The worst we have is what's called a one-party, I will double check the definition. It's a one-party authoritarian regime in which, no, illiberal democracy, that's the term. Illiberal democracy, in which when a political party comes to power, it will do everything it can to suppress parties that are not itself. An example of this is the PRI in Mexico, which controlled Mexico uncontested for nearly 80 years, 70 years. Or the current reigning party in I believe Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is considered an illiberal democracy because they do hold elections, but the veracity of those elections is disputed. And I'm very concerned about the inevitability of if we can't talk with the other side, no matter what that side might be. If we do not rediscover compromise, we will inevitably end up in an illiberal democracy, which then could not be really called a democracy at all.
Interesting.
On that inspiring but not so hopeful note.
Got our work cut out
We
for
can
us,
change
that's for
things.
sure.
We
No,
can change things. Things have been getting better.
Absolutely.
The fact that more and more people can vote, the fact that information for the first time is accessible to everyone. In even 20 years ago, you could get your news from maybe 7 sources, which had certain controls on them. Now, for better or worse, information is free and available. And that has changed things so much, I think, for the better. Inevitably, the question is whether or not we can still form compromises with all of this differing sources of information that can be used to back up our opinion. How do we separate that? And that is the challenge at this point. And I think we can surpass it. I'm very hopeful about things.
Could I just ask about the challenge Julie mentioned? Have you on campus run into a lot of out-of-state students or lots of students who need to register all over the state as well as all over the country? How have you helped people Or do you help people, students, run through that?
Absolutely. And the joy of mail-in ballots is that you can mail it.
Yeah.
It's voting is accessible. You can re-register. I mean, there's a lot of ways to establish residency for that purpose. And students are really, really active to do that and encourage. Yeah, they can do that mostly because then you get in-state tuition, and that's a lot less. So there's an impetus for that. So, but also, I mean, vote by mail is the best thing to happen in a very, very long time, and it's accessible. So, back to you in the studio, Jason.
Yeah.
Well, May, anything else?
No, this is wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, Greg and Lucas, thank you. We really appreciate your time.